For Inside Carolina, I'm Taylor Vippolis, and this is Up in the Rafters, where I'm joined by Carolina basketball legend and 2017 national champion Justin Jackson. Justin, this is a mailbag edition of Up in the Rafters from the IC Premium message board. Appreciate everybody sending in the questions. Always helps out the podcast. People have a lot of questions about this team. I'm hoping that you have some answers. A lot of people are watching this team kind of confused with what we're watching. But on a lighter note, somebody opened the questions and said, "What is your favorite comedy movie of all time?"
Ooh, you didn't warn me about these questions, man. Favorite comedy? I think it just kind of depends, man. Because like, Elf to me is a comedy movie, but at the
It
same time,
is.
it's like Christmas. Like,
It falls in both categories.
yeah. So I'm gonna say Elf because it's a classic, but Semi-Pro is hard to beat. Um,
Will
Honestly, the
Ferrell
more
guy.
yeah, I was just about to say, the more I think about it, it's more Will Ferrell. So yeah, I'd probably say you gotta throw those two in there.
Yeah, if I had to go, I would go Step Brother. So I'm with you with the Will Ferrell. That question was from Heel Blue 82. The next question we have, getting to the basketball stuff, just to set the scene. Carolina, they've lost 5 of their last 7 games. They won the last time out against Notre Dame at Notre Dame, but it was ugly. 19 points at half from the Tar Heels. They shot 18.5% from the field. According to Steve Kirshner, that's the lowest percentage that North Carolina's ever shot in a half. They outscored the Irish by 12 in the second half to win. I think the biggest takeaway from that game is nothing is going to come easy for this team as they kind of close out the season. Every game they're going to play teams tight, and they're really not that much better than any other team when their shot's not falling. But this question is for you. It's, what do you think the biggest issue with this team is? Is it simple as a lack of shot making, intensity, attention to detail, offensive scheme, or do the pieces just not fit, or all of the above?
That question is loaded.
From
I,
JT Mintz one.
I I think the first problem is there's just no floor spacing when it comes to shooting. And I think that's why when you look at this team, you think, okay, it's really basically the same team from last year. Why are they not having the same success that they had towards the end of the year? But it's because of the fact that you had a guy who could space the floor and knock down, just catch and shoot simple threes like Brady could. And they just don't really have anybody right now that's able to do that on a consistent basis. And so when you have crafty guards like RJ and Caleb trying to get downhill all the time, or Mondo down low trying to, do his thing on the block, if you don't have guys that are threats on the perimeter, then the defense can just adjust and shift away from those guys who can't really shoot and help guard whoever the main threat is. And so I think that's really the biggest thing, is just not a lot of shooting out there on the court. Um, but I think that also kind of it translates into defensively, because if they're not hitting shots, their body language and their intensity on defense is totally different. Like, if I think we were talking about it, but it's funny to see when Caleb hits a couple shots defensively, he locks down the next few possessions, right?
He
Like,
looks
his
like a completely different player.
completely different player. And all basketball players fall into that at some point. Like, I've done the same exact thing. It's like, if your shot's not falling, you don't have the urgency necessarily, because you're just thinking about getting the next shot to fall. But I think because of the not really having a bunch of shot makers on the offensive end, it causes issues defensively when it comes to intensity and things like that. So hopefully, they can get hot and kind of go on a roll, and guys can, step in, be consistent shooting wise. But I think that's the main problem, is just not really having a ton of consistent shooting on the outside.
From a defensive perspective, when you're watching this North Carolina team, their effort kind of comes and goes. But I think one consistent we've kind of seen, especially towards the end of the game, teams are going to go after RJ Davis. How worrying do you think that is for North Carolina, knowing that they need his offensive production, but he, I don't think with him it's a lack of effort. He leads the team in charges. I think he has 14 charges. The rest of the team combined has 11. they need his offense, but at the same time, he looks to be a liability on the defensive end. What can Carolina kind of do to maybe hide him on the defensive end, or is it as simple as trying to do the offense for defense with somebody like Seth Trimble as much as possible?
I mean, it's tough because, like you said, it's not that RJ is not necessarily putting effort in. It's just unfortunate that he's a smaller guard, and so teams that are smart will try to attack whatever the mismatch might be. And at times it is RJ whenever it comes to maybe there's a bigger guard that he's guarding, or they get a switch or whatever it might be. I think that honestly just comes down to scheme. At this point in the season, that's kind of what they're going to do. And if you want to keep, obviously, RJ is one of the key pieces for the team. So you want to try to have him on the court as much as possible. So maybe there's defensively, if he switches off onto somebody that's looking to duck him in, maybe you try to just go double right away when they try to pass it inside. Or maybe, might be crazy, but maybe you throw a zone at the end of the game, to kind of change things up defensively. I think there's just different schemes that you can do. And I'm sure, like we said before, I think Coach Davis is probably looking at each and every possible thing that he might need to do to help this team make a run towards the end of the season. But I think that's kind of what you have to do. You see a bunch of times on other teams in the NBA and college, there might be guys who are considered, not defensive players, but they figure out ways to, not necessarily hide them, but to, put in a scheme that helps him or whatever it might be on the defensive end. So I'm sure Coach Davis is coming up with something.
This question is from Carolina Fever 83. This is something that we kind of talked about earlier in the season where, the thing that was the most worrying was the coaching staff talking about the lack of effort, the lack of intensity. When you go to the national championship, it's something that I don't think we're able to kind of process in our minds how a team can kind of lose that motivation and lose that focus when you were a half away from achieving a goal that you probably had since the time you learned what college basketball is. So who would you say is ultimately at fault for the lack of effort? Is it entirely on the players? Is some of it on the coaching staff? And why do you think there is such a big disconnect there in getting this team to play a motivated game of basketball for 40 minutes?
I think it's a mixture. But before I say that, I'm not, obviously we're not there each and every day through practice, through the off season, all that kind of stuff. So we don't necessarily see day-to-day situations, right? So we can only speak on kind of things that we're seeing. And for me, I think a majority of it goes on the players. I think a lot of times, like when we think about the fact that they just made it to the national championship game, and like you said, they were a half away. Going into the next season, it's even tougher to get back to where you just were. No matter if you're the same exact team or maybe you added some better pieces, whatever it is, it's even harder to get there. And so you have to have that mindset of, okay, like this isn't just because we made it and maybe just because we're preseason number one, that does not mean that, okay, it's just going to be easy just to get back to where we just were. So I think we've talked about it before, like the mindset that they were supposed to have going into the season was supposed to be even more intense, even more locked in, and more locked in towards the goal of, okay, we want to get back there and win it. But then too, I think, just in general, I think a lot of times when you see, lapses on the court with this team when it comes to effort or shot selection or turnovers or just bad like miscues within the game, I think some of it comes to accountability. Now, whether that's players holding each other accountable or that's the coaching staff holding the players accountable, like accountability is one of the biggest things that you have to make it to that level. And so whether it is maybe the coaching staff is holding everybody accountable and they're still just going out there and just doing whatever they want to do. But I think accountability is a big piece that I feel like I don't know fully if it really is a problem, but just looking from the outside looking in, it seems like that's the part that's kind of missing. And that goes into leadership, all that kind of stuff. But I think like I said, I think it's kind of a mix of both, but it's on the players once they get on the court to have the mindset of, okay, we want to make it back to where we just were and we want to win it this time.
This question is from Omaha Heel 40. He's got a profile picture of Harrison Barnes, so I'm assuming that's where the 40 is coming in from. He asked, "What was your lowest point as a team following a loss during your career outside of the national championship? And was there anything unique done in practice or off the court to kind of create a spark to get you guys back on track?"
Lowest point. We had a few tough ones, but I want to say it was it was against Northern Iowa, maybe, or maybe Texas. One of those two. Northern Iowa for sure. We were not supposed to go in there and lose. It was supposed to be like this nice homecoming for Marcus. Obviously, he couldn't play because of his injury, but it was supposed to be a nice homecoming. We were supposed to go in there, do our thing, beat them, and they just took it at us. And so, if I remember correctly, the next practice, I don't think we had rims on the goal. And I think it was like a circuit, like it was like a whole like conditioning circuit type deal. But yeah, I think that was a rough one. But like the crazy thing is we talk about this all the time within our group chat with like Marcus and Kenny and B Rob and them. It's like thinking back to the times when I was there, I can't imagine losing 5 out of 6, which was what they were before they won this game at Notre Dame. And the reason I can't imagine that is because we would have been terrified to lose another game if we would have lost 2 or 3 in a row because our practices would have been absolutely miserable. Like we would have been running, we would have been doing all the things that basketball players don't want to do. And so it's like just thinking back to that, maybe it is just, the guys were just kind of different when it came to mentally, like we just didn't want to do that. And so we were like, okay, we got to change things up or what. But I just can't imagine going 5 out of 7 now and not changing our intensity from the jump of the next game or, whatever it might be. But yeah, when you walk into a gym and you don't see rims, that means no shooting, which is like the number one thing that basketball players want to do. And that means there's going to be a lot of defense and conditioning. It's never a good feeling.
That is, if you lost 5 of 6 with Roy, you would have forgot what a basketball looked like, you think?
Yeah, we wouldn't have. I don't even know if we would have had our locker room. I think we might have been like, we would have been in the training room probably with like chairs and like tape that just had our names on it. Like that would have been, yeah, it would have been bad.
I've always been a fan of the coaches who take away the team gear. Like you got to earn wearing the Carolina logo back.
Yeah, yeah. That's if we would have lost 5 out of 6, I think we would have possibly been at that point. So thank goodness we did it.
This next question is from UNC NBA 14. It's something that we've touched on a bit, but kind of expanding on it. Do you think it's realistic to have the same level of passion and connectivity as a team in a world of NIL and outside voices, or does that shift to more of an individual type focus? And we've touched on the NIL, and the only reason why I don't think NIL is a problem is because Carolina is not the only team in the country that's having to deal with NIL. But what do you think about the outside voices type, where every player has their own trainer, every player has their parent? You kind of have that AAU culture now where, a player's first thing after a game is to talk to their parents, or something happens on the court and the first thing they're doing is looking at their parents for coaching. Do you think that's a problem at all with this Carolina team and then kind of college basketball as a whole?
Um, I mean, I think the whole parent player dynamic has always been a thing. I think maybe now that they're struggling, I think it's put more in the spotlight. Maybe. I think the bigger thing with the NIL, I obviously these are college kids, right? Like they've never seen the kind of money that they're bringing in now because of NIL deals, and I'm so happy that they're able to make this money, because for so long players weren't able to make any kind of money that the NCAA was just raking in. So I think for one, first and foremost, I'm a full supporter of the NIL. But I think when you look at the dynamics of the NIL deals and how it changes the scene of college basketball, I equate it just to being in the NBA, right? Like every player on an NBA roster is making money, right? Every player is making different kinds of money. Like the minimum is the minimum, the max guy is the max, but everybody's making money. And at the same time, they're still buying into a collective team. We want to win a championship, right? And now I think that's obviously how college basketball is at this point, where it's like, okay, I got to try to figure out how can I make as much money off of NIL deals for me as an individual player, but as a team, you have to still come together and have a collective goal in mind. And so I think there's obviously it's a process. This is the first real year of guys just making a ton of money off NIL deals. And so, it's probably an adjustment for most players and even the coaches, but I think there's still a way to focus on yourself and these NIL deals while also wanting to win a championship. Now, a lot of that also goes to loving the game of basketball. Like you have to love what you're doing to put in all the effort that you are supposed to put in. And if you're not, then you're not going to, if you're just getting paid, then what's the point of me putting in extra work or doing all this? I'm already making all this money. Right. So I think it's kind of a mixture, but I think there is a way to balance, at any level. So, I think obviously North Carolina will figure it out. Like you said, all of college basketball and college athletics is dealing with this. So they'll figure it out. It's an adjustment period for sure.
This next question is from Tennessee Tar Heel 99, your neck of the woods. Shout out Cleveland, shout out Chattanooga. The
Shout
question
out the
is,
in-laws.
what can this team do as players to improve their shooting ability mid-season? I understand you can't change an entire shot mechanic this late into it, but is there anything that the guys could be doing aside from repetition to get shots to fall in the basket? Because I think when we're watching the Notre Dame game, they're shooting a lot of open shots. It's not really contested shots. They're just missing shots that you would normally expect basketball players at your guys' level to hit and knock down on a consistent basis.
Honestly, I think it's just repetitions. To be honest, there's really outside of repetitions, the only thing you can really do is completely change somebody's shot. And like this person said, you're not going to change somebody's shot mid-season, especially not this late in the season. Um, so anything that you can do is just get as comfortable as possible shooting the different kinds of shots that you would shoot in the game. And so, you know, I'm not there every day, but we haven't really seen any consistency shooting at all season. And so my only thing would be, okay, like let's just get into the gym and shoot a ton of shots. And we still might brick a ton of shots the next game. But as long as you're preparing yourself and getting as many reps as you can to get as comfortable as you can for the game time, then that's all you can really do. And so, unfortunately, I think that's really all there is. There's no like, hey, let's make a mixture and have them drink their special drink, and boom, they can knock down shots on a consistent basis. It's just a matter of them getting in the gym and doing kind of the hard and tedious work of getting shots up.
This question was actually from JT Mint, so I don't know who I credited his question with earlier. But he asked, is the team shooting woes a mental issue, a lack of confidence, or a mental issue / lack of confidence, or a physical technique issue? Is that something that you would be able to tell without, getting in the film room and breaking it down?
I mean, for one, it's towards the end of the season, so you got to think about how many practices, how many workouts, how many games, how much traveling they have to do. Your body starts to just get tired as the season goes on, and so unless you're taking care of your body like you're supposed to, then you're going to have towards the end of the game, towards the end of the season, you're going to kind of have some dips. So I think maybe physically, maybe they're just a little more tired, and so shots don't come off their hands right. There's so much that goes into shooting that seems like it's so simple, but maybe that's what it is. Maybe it is they haven't shot the ball well most of the season. And so now it's more thinking about I have to make this next shot as opposed to this next shot is going in because I just feel comfortable shooting it. Um, I'm not totally sure what it is, but I think for them mentally, it's just a matter of just stepping into shots confidently. Like you're gonna make or miss it at the end of the day. Like that's just how it is. And unfortunately, throughout this season, there's been a lot of misses. So just step into it confidently. If you miss it, get back on defense. If you make it, cool. Try to keep the same rhythm that you shot that shot with. But I think it's just a matter of just shooting confidently and hopefully they can get hot at the right time.
Yeah, this stat comes from Brian Ives on Twitter. North Carolina's three-point shooting in February. Caleb Love is 24 of 62, so 39%. The rest of the team is 21 for 119, 18%. If this North Carolina team is able to raise their three-point percentage to a more respectable level, 35%, how much impact would that have on this team's late season trajectory if Caleb continues to hit shots, but you also get contributions from deep from RJ, Pete, and Puff to a lesser extent?
Yeah, I mean it totally changes the dynamic of the team. Um, I mean, we've seen clips of how when certain guys are on the floor and if they're the opposite side of the ball, their defender is literally in the middle of the paint. And there's no way you can have any kind of functionality to your offense with the defense being able to just shrink completely into the paint and not have to worry about getting out to the guys on the perimeter. So, like you said, if obviously Caleb shot the ball well in February, but if RJ, even Leaky, if Pete, like if those guys can just knock down simple catch and shoot threes or, simple drive kicks and just step into it confidently and knock it down, then the defense can't just shrink into the paint. So then RJ can get into the paint. Mondo has way more space in there to either when he gets the ball go and score it or clear people out for offensive rebounds. So I think it's just a matter of just being able to space the floor. It's a totally different game when you have shooters on the floor. Like you look at guys in the NBA, the Warriors for the longest, they're the most terrifying team because all they do is just space and shoot threes. Like there's nothing else. Like their big man, even all he's doing is just setting screens, rolling, or he's spaced to the 3-point line. So when you look at a team like North Carolina with, at the end of the day, they've got talent. Caleb, RJ, Mondo, Pete, like they have talent. It's just a matter of being able to play an open spaced floor. And a lot of that goes to guys just stepping in and being confident, knocking down shots.
Yeah, and one area that I wanted to make sure that we mentioned, especially after the Notre Dame game, um, area that I thought really helped him out. Pete Nance, his entry passes into Mondo. I think that's one area where if his shot's not falling, this team has struggled at times to get the ball inside to Armando. I think Pete does a really good job of providing those entry passes. And then Leaky, where this stat is from Trevor William Marks on Twitter, he's averaging 7.4 points, 9.1 rebounds, and 1.8 steals per game in the month of February. And then he's rebounding the ball exceptionally well on both ends, 3.7 offensive rebounds per game over that stretch, where even if this team is struggling to shoot, this newfound Leaky, who's crashing the glass a lot harder than we've ever seen him crash the glass, is providing those second chance points. And this North Carolina team can steal a lot of possessions when things aren't going well for them. So what have you kind of seen from Leaky and from Pete, who might not be providing the offensive scoring that fans might want to see, but they're trying to find other ways to impact the game?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the most important thing is whether your shots are falling or whatever it is, what ways can you impact the game to help your team win? And I think a lot of times, I think Leaky sometimes gets a bad rap when it comes to, him not necessarily being a knockdown 3-point shooter. But when you really look at Leaky's game, everybody on the team isn't necessarily going to be a knockdown shooter. But when you look at Leaky's game, he does a lot of things to impact winning, right? Like he might do some things that, might hurt him at times, but he does a lot of things to impact winning. Defensively, he guards the other team's best player every game. Like you said, he's been hitting the offensive glass like a madman the past couple games, which honestly is kind of should be his way offensively of getting involved, because if his man's not guarding him, as tightly as other guys, it gives you a free run to the basket every time. So to see him doing that, to see him getting, the team more second chance opportunities when they're not necessarily shooting the ball well, that just means they need more shot attempts. So, I think you got to give Leaky a lot of credit. And I think certain games he has stepped in and knocked down some shots, and made some plays for them offensively. And then I think Pete, he obviously hasn't shot the ball well. Like he'd probably be the first to admit like he wishes that he's shot the ball a little bit better. But he's also done other things. I think the last game against Notre Dame, he had 11, 10, and 5, something like that.
They
And
don't
so
win
I
that game
think
without him.
no, not at all. And I think at the same time, he went 3 for 12 from the field. So it's like there's obviously a trade off. But at the end of the day, where they're at in this season, no matter whether your shots are falling, if you're 0 for 20, 19 for 20, you have to do things to affect winning. And if they can somehow come together as a group and figure out whatever it is individually that the team needs to do that, then I think, they have a shot of kind of doing the same thing they did last year and getting hot and making a run. But at this point in the season, it doesn't matter about what percentages are, what points per game are. Like each and every guy has to just buy into whatever the team needs to try to get wins.
Yeah, the team is on the wrong side of the bubble right now, which is not something you want to be saying this late into February, just about 2 weeks probably away from Selection Sunday. This next question is from Sweet Pass. He asked, what are your views on the current bench play and the lack of production that Carolina has gotten from its bench and the rotations that we kind of see in these games?
Um, I think that's tough because the only real way for a player to produce and have an effect on the game is to play. And I think a lot of times throughout this season, they just haven't gotten much opportunity. Like HD will throw Tyler Nickel in there for 3 minutes and then he won't play the rest of the game. Or Dunn will go in there for 2 or 3 minutes and then won't play the rest of the game. And so, whatever the thought is behind that, obviously that's their prerogative as the coaches and, especially as HD as the head coach. But as a player, it's almost impossible to affect the game on the court if you're not playing at least some sort of consistent minutes. Even if it's like 10 minutes a game, you're going to play 5 minutes in the first half, 5 minutes in the second half. You're able to kind of get into a rhythm and do what you're supposed to do. But whenever you don't really have consistent minutes, it's going to be hard. And so I think a part of that is they just haven't really gotten consistent opportunities. And so I think, as hard as it is, they just have to keep the mindset of, the whole cliche of stay ready for whenever your name is called. So I think I'll put it more on the opportunities that the lack of opportunities that they've had than them going out there and not really doing much with it.
Yeah, my problem with the rotation that Carolina currently has, it's, DeMarco, he plays 0 minutes against NC State, and then he's one of the first guys off the bench against Notre Dame. Jalen Washington doesn't play at all against NC State, and we saw his contributions when Mondo went down in that Virginia game and how he's shown flashes. And it would be one thing if this team had won like 7 straight games and it's like, okay, you can't really criticize who's going in and when, but when you're losing 5 of 7 and you have these guys on the bench, it's like, maybe let's just see what they have. And when you have somebody like Dunn, whose minutes kind of jump around from game to game, and you could say it's a schematic thing, but we talked about earlier, RJ Davis, where it's not like, he's the best two-way player that Carolina has. So it does open up a lot of questions. And, when you are losing as much as this Carolina team has lost recently, people do want to see changes. So that's really my one gripe with the rotation. The final question I have from you is from Heel23. Yeah. He said, after this season, which positions would you target in the portal, or not only positions, but I guess types of player would you target in the portal for what this Carolina team needs going forward?
Um, I mean, that's tough, and I think this is why that's why it'd be so hard to be a coach as far as recruiting and trying to bring people in. I think obviously what we talked about pretty much this whole episode is shooting. Um, so I think it's a matter of finding spacers that can shoot the ball. Obviously, can play both sides of the ball, but they need some sort of spacers that can really stretch the floor and be able to knock down shots. Um, and I think it's tough too because who knows what the team looks like next year, right? Like we don't know who's coming back, who's going to try to go professional, whatever it might be. Um, so I think it just kind of depends on what happens with the team, and then there's obviously some freshmen that are going to come in and hopefully help them out a little bit. So I think my biggest thing, which is obviously their biggest hole this year, is shooting. And if they can find some guys, even if it's guys on the roster right now, if they can find some guys that can be consistent 3-point shooters for them, I think it totally changes the look of their team.
Yeah, I would be going in the portal, sorting those players out by highest 3-point percentage, and then getting them on the line. Maybe getting a facilitator two type guard. I think Carolina has two score first type guards right now in RJ Davis and Caleb Love, and that's one of the reasons why they might struggle running in transition, where both of those guys are looking to get theirs, and not only are they looking to get theirs, but that's when they're at their best, is when they're initiating the offense themselves, trying to get the best shots for themselves. So maybe I would definitely say shooting has to be a priority, but also maybe a facilitator type player. But Carolina back in action tomorrow, February 25th, Saturday, 6 p.m. against number 6 Virginia. A huge game for Carolina in their bubble pursuit and trying to get back on the right side of the bubble. You beat a top 10 team like Virginia. That's a quad 1 win. Carolina desperately needs as many quad 1 wins as they can to close out the year, as they're currently sitting on 0. You got to hope some of the teams that Carolina has beaten, or some of the teams that Carolina has beaten too, keep winning. Teams like Michigan. I think that Ohio State win is getting worse as the season goes on, and the Buckeyes just keep losing every time they take the court. But Justin, appreciate you. Appreciate everybody watching or listening, and of course appreciate the Inside Carolina Premium message board this week for sending in questions.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it.